Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. While we wait for people to log in for another couple of minutes, I'm just going to post a polling question for you. For those of you who just logged in, we're just giving people a chance to vote and wait for a couple of more attendees, and then we'll get started shortly. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't made up your mind, pick something. We're going to shut down the vote in a minute and get started. Okay, give me a few more seconds and then I will shut down the vote and get started. All right, hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Tips to Build Your Data Protection Business Case. I'm Shey here at Digital Guardian, and I will be your moderator today. I'm joined by Heidi Shey from Forrester and Bill Bradley from Digital Guardian. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce Heidi Shey, a senior analyst with Forrester. Heidi serves security and risk professionals in solutions for data security and privacy, and for security architecture and operations. Her research focus is on data discovery and classification, secure file sharing and collaboration, cybersecurity and privacy topics, such as policy and regulatory concerns, biometrics, and consumer security. She also focuses on data-driven topics such as security spending and cost of a data breach. She's a team lead for survey design, methodology development, and data analysis in consulting engagements. Heidi has been with Forrester since 2006. Her previous focus was on the tech sector economics, conducting quantitative analysis and forecasting of B2B technology adoption, and IT spending and budget trends for technology vendors. She's also supported Forrester's business technographics team on survey development and quality initiatives. Bill Bradley is Director of Product Marketing here at Digital Guardian. He has over 15 years of technology, marketing, and sales experience, including field sales, competitive analysis, and product positioning and messaging. Prior to Digital Guardian, Bill was at Rapid7 and General Electric Corporation. And now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Heidi Shey.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for taking the time to join us for this webinar today. All right, so building a business case. In some ways, it resembles making a resolution and plan for getting fit and exercising. You're committing to this approach and you have your reasons behind it. And starting is not necessarily the hard part here. The difficult thing is to maintain this and also adapt over time in order to keep seeing results and improvement, rather than having this be a burst of activity and then going back to being a couch potato. And when it comes to data protection, I see a lot of organizations taking a compliance-based approach to building their business case, which to me seems a lot like focusing on a pretty narrow view of things. It's like the person at the gym who only lifts weights and has really big arm muscles, but they neglect the rest of their body. And so a compliance-based business case can be limiting in several ways. And for starters, yes, you do end up with a to-do list of things that you have to do to meet compliance. But unfortunately, this can have the effect of narrowing down perception and scope of data protection within the company, because there's plenty of sensitive data that just doesn't fall under compliance requirements. For example, maybe your executives, their travel itineraries, maybe meeting notes or emails that contain sensitive corporate information or other intellectual property. This would not be covered by any specific compliance requirement. Compliance also encourages a focus on cost reduction as well, because especially as you move up the chain, security ends up being seen as a cost center when data protection becomes something that you just have to do, or else you'll get into trouble with the regulator. So let's just get this over with without spending too much. That's not the attitude that you want the company to have. This approach also sends a message that compliance is security, and that's not quite right, because it enables a false sense of security here when the company starts to think that way. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk about compliance when making your business case, because this is still a very important thing. So compliance is something that has to be done, and we can't ignore that it's going to cost us money and resources in order to meet these requirements. So you have to build that into the discussion when you build your business case. We understand that we don't have unlimited budget to do these things. The point here is that we have to be mindful of when and how we choose to frame things and use compliance as a part of our justification for investment, rather than having it be the only or the sole reason for investing. And while we're being cautious here, I'll also point to our friend Chicken Little. It's not unusual to want to use and point to examples of data breaches that have already happened to other companies as a way of illustrating the consequences and the negative costs. And on some level, this is helpful to do, especially if an event on the news has gotten the attention of your business and the business leaders are starting to come to you with questions about security and the cost of a breach as a result of reading an article or seeing a news report somewhere. But at some point, we have to realize that this gets pretty old. It can also backfire if we opt to focus on the hypothetical cost of breach based on expenses that we've seen other companies incur, because it's not necessarily a reflection of the exact scenario or similar scenario that may unfold for your organization. Because there's a lot that goes unreported here, and also more that goes unaccounted for. So a lot of companies, after they've experienced a breach, they're not going to want to sit down in the months and the years afterwards to figure out what the actual cost may have been. They're more focused on moving on. And we may be able to gather, as outsiders, some numbers in a financial filing, if it's a public company, or some other article that's been written about the breach. But we have to realize that those figures, they're not going to tell us the full picture. And that old but solid iceberg analogy is fitting here. So So we may see some costs and consequences that get publicly reported, such as maybe an executive leaving the company, lawsuits, fines, but there's a lot more that's beneath the surface that is hard to pin down cost figures to. So if we think about maybe possible recruiting issues, not just for the people who have left as a result of the breach, but how do you get more qualified security staff to come and work for you post-breach? Do you have to then offer them additional incentives or maybe increase their salary in order to make this an attractive offer? We may be dealing with additional audit requirements that will require additional funding to accomplish. Maybe there are lost business partners as a result of this breach, and that's hard to quantify if you're an outsider as well. And then possibly operational changes that happen to a company post-breach that we just don't really get to see. So there's a lot of the unknowns. And it's not just about breaches as well. So going back to the compliance story, non-compliance can certainly have its costs, which is why we can't completely ignore compliance in our business case discussions. If we think about the privacy violations that may happen, it's not just about getting slapped with a fine. Typically, there are other conditions and requirements that get handed down that may cost time, money, and effort to meet. So that could be, X years worth of audits, maybe 20 years. Or you may be required to hire a privacy officer, implement training for employees, and other things. And all of these will come with a price. So by all means, talk about cost of a breach. It should not be an off the table type of thing. It can even be helpful to run your own analysis and estimate what a hypothetical breach could cost your organization, to at least get familiar with the different types of costs that could be incurred. But we have to realize that whatever estimate we come up with here could be much, much lower than what's actually required. So the key here is when we talk about cost of a breach, to turn that conversation around. Use these examples of data breaches when we're making our business case, but use it to highlight factors that contributed to this breach that made headlines. Identify what those lessons learned were from this event. Maybe draw some possible parallels with your current environment, and make it really relevant and specific to what it would mean for your organization and what needs to be done to mitigate that risk. You could also use this as a jumping point to talk about the need for risk assessment or to tie in to your higher level security strategy. And so with compliance, cost of a breach, there are certainly limitations as well as benefits when using this to help build your business case. But there's also another way, and that's making a business case based on values. And by values, I mean focusing on the value of data, as well as the value add of data protection for the business. And when we frame and build our business case this way, a couple of different things happen. We demonstrate alignment with business priorities. So here we want to show that security understands what direction this ship is trying to sail in, and we point out how and where we can help the ship sail in that direction. And when we do this, we show how security contributes to growth as well as revenue for the organization. So say, for example, there's a big push to expand the business and open a new sales office in Singapore next year. So we need to ask ourselves, well, what do we need to do to ensure that employees in the new office have access to the resources that they need to be successful, to understand the risk that this new office could create for the rest of the business. And then consider our approach here and options from a data protection and security standpoint. And so a value-based business case also encourages a focus on understanding the data, understanding the value of the data that the organization has, creates, or collects, understanding how is this data used, And why do we have this? Why do we need this data? And then understanding all of this, it allows us to demonstrate that this is data that, well, we need to protect it because it's important. So this focus on data value helps to support other types of data protection initiatives, like data classification or employee awareness of proper data use as well as handling, which then contributes to building this culture of data protection for the organization. And when we think about value adds of how data protection adds value, it sends a message that security and privacy are business differentiators. And this in turn helps to support the view that security is a business partner and enabler rather than a cost center or a department of no. And so there's a couple of different approaches that you can take to identify value. I'm going to point out two of them here. So first off,
hey, Heidi, do you want to take a quick pause for a moment here? I wanted to push out the next polling questions to the audience at this point. This is Bill Bradley over at Digital Guardian. Again, I appreciate the answers to the first question here. Our second question here out the audience is, Heidi's outlined a couple of the compliance-based approach, the values-based approach here, and our question is, what type of business case do you see having more success within your organization? And this is around historically. What have you done in the past, and what has been more successful? Whether it be the compliance-driven, the values-driven, or do you really look at this combination approach out there that looks at both sides of the coin? So, give a few people a couple minutes here to respond to this question. In the meantime, I want to look back to the first question that we had out there, where I was looking at some of the answers there. And it looks like we have a good, really the majority of the audience, 90+%, are in some cases aligning security initiatives with their business goals. So that's a great start that people do this. I think the challenge is half the people out in the call there are only doing it occasionally, and we have the rarely there at around 8% there. So more than half of us out there can potentially do more to link those security initiatives with the business goals and show how that by adding security into our organization, we can help drive the business forward versus just looking at security as a necessary cost out there in the market dynamic. So with that, I give people another minute or so to vote in this one here. And from my perspective, I've been in a few different organizations in the past, some that have been very much compliance driven, others that truly are looking at the values and the business approach. And I think Heidi touched on this as well, as each one of them has a reason for existing out there, and each one does bring some benefits, and really it's what works best in your organization to help you get your projects pushed forward. So give another few seconds here, and then I'm going to close up the poll, and I'll send it back to Heidi if she has any comments on this one here, and then to continue on with our discussion. So 5 more seconds for people out there. All right, we're going to close the voting, and Heidi, I'm going to send it back to you if you want to have any comments there on what we're seeing for the results here. It looks like almost 2/3 are already looking at that combination approach. So I don't know if you want to touch on that and maybe comment on anything else on the previous 2 polling questions.
Sure. All right. So it's good to see, I think, that folks are using a combination in most cases here, because I think just looking at these 2 different approaches, it really appeals to different types of audiences within the enterprise. So knowing what's going to push people's buttons or get their attention and get them on board to support you is important. So that whole concept of knowing your audience and knowing what it is that they're trying to accomplish, what they want, and tailoring your messages accordingly so that it really resonates in order to achieve the objectives that you have. So that's encouraging to see. And I think going back to that first poll question about how often you align your initiatives, the security ones, with the business goals, I think it's excellent to see so many that say that they do this, or at least try to do this occasionally, just because I think this is becoming more of the security discussion these days. We realize that it's not something that happens, behind the scenes. It's not an IT thing. It's a business imperative today. So being able to have these higher level discussions and connections is very important. Okay, so with that, I'm going to keep the train moving here. So different approaches to identifying value. And there's other ones out there, but these are two that I wanted to point out today. And one of them is to quantify, really get these numbers around the value of information security for the organization. And this is more of a financial modeling type of approach where you're comparing the value of your information assets, so your data, against the costs that are associated with protecting it. And I'll dig into this more in later slides, but this is a method it's really more useful for figuring out resource allocation and seeing if the level of protection for a particular data type is in line with the value of this data to the company. And so another way to show value here is more qualitative, so where you're demonstrating the security alignment with the business initiatives. And this approach is more useful when it comes to having these more strategic discussions and gaining greater executive visibility here. So you can imagine that a blended approach may be the best option for most folks, depending on the audience that they're talking to. So quantifying the value, it all starts with identifying what is your data worth. So ultimately, you really have two types of data. There is data of the shiny, sparkly variety, your crown jewels, your sensitive corporate data, your customer data, your employee data. This is the data of value, both to your company as well as to a third party who may want to use it for their own gain, whether to sell or to use themselves or to expose to the public to make a statement. And then there's the other type of data that is of use to your company, but you wouldn't really care much if it was lost or stolen or exposed. This would generally be public information, like a data sheet about your product, or maybe a marketing brochure that's already out for distribution. But one thing here with this other data type is that we have to consider the time element as well, because there may be data today that you're not all that worried about, but it could become a concern later on. And I think this is where we'll start to see things get interesting with data that we're starting to collect from sensors and other types of connected devices, so pointing to the Internet of Things as a possible source to keep an eye out on because of the data that these things are now generating. And so to determine the value of our data, we really need the help of other business stakeholders here, because how we're doing this is that we need to first categorize our data, our information assets by business area. So here it's about having an understanding of the lay of the land and being able to answer the question of what data you have, where, and why it's there. And then the next here is that for the data that produces revenue or contributes to revenue in some way, whether that's customer data, intellectual property, quantify what that contribution looks like. Now, this is where it helps to connect with other business unit leaders. So it could be, sales, it could be marketing, it could be, product groups, service groups, other leads, depending on how your business is organized. And have a better understanding after connecting with these folks about what the business plans are for the various products or services that are delivered. And then identify the business processes that are supported by this data. But of course, not all the data would generate revenue, so we have these non-revenue generating assets to consider as well. And this is generally data that's the cost of doing business and may require protection based on a compliance requirement. It could be employee identity and health records, or other information that would fall under SOX or HIPAA, FFIEC, or other regulations. And so if you decide to stop at this point, then I think you're already in pretty good shape already, because you will have at least identified your data of value, and that in itself goes a long way for developing your data protection strategy and understanding what it is that you're trying to protect. But there's also more to this quantitative approach if you're trying to take it all on. So since you've identified data value, you can also consider the costs associated with protecting this data. And there's a lot of other examples of different types of costs that you can try to pinpoint and use in order to estimate the total cost of protection. And some of these are direct costs that are easier to measure, while others are a little bit more variable, a little more squishy, depending on circumstances. So things like fixed operational costs. This would be office space, support costs for staff, maybe license fees for security software. Fixed legal and regulatory costs. This could be things like the cost of a external audit, or PCI compliance reviews, or other legal obligations here. And then we have direct as well as variable costs that are typically associated with breaches or compliance violations. So maybe forensic analysis could fall under here, consulting fees as well, or breach notification services and other things. There's also different types of variable legal and regulatory costs as well. So this could be the result of a breach or compliance violation, so a fine could be included here, penalties, other costs of audit. Settlements, legal defense could fall under here as well. Then we also have variable operational costs. So for example, this could also be associated with the response, with the breach event. And it could be things like the cost of implementing new controls or selecting new partners, implementing new security processes. And then this last one here, I think, is the most difficult one, really, these variable reputational costs. It's one of the harder ones to quantify, but it's, I think, important to consider as well, because what is this price on the reputation of your company? For most, it's a priceless asset. So with this understanding of the value of data, the revenue that it would generate, as well as the cost associated with protecting this data, you can use that to figure out a ratio of protection costs to revenue and call that information security value. And so this is a ratio that you can use to just be a sanity check, really, for investments and resource allocation. And over time, you can track this ratio to see how you do and use it as one of the many ways that you may use to report on your data protection program. But we have to be careful not to fall into that same compliance-based cost-cutting trap. So don't focus only on trying to bring this ratio down for the different types of data assets you have. That would be like focusing on weight loss at the expense of overall physical, mental, and emotional health. So really, I would use this really as a method of framing your budget conversations and your business case conversations around the value of the data that you're trying to protect. And then on the qualitative side of demonstrating value, I mentioned earlier about aligning security with business initiatives. And I have a few more examples here that you can take as starting points for topics to consider or inspiration. The main thing really is to identify what's specific to your business and go from there. But chances are some of these may be relevant and strike a chord as well. Converting analytics to customer value. So when we think about analytics today, it really can help to improve a company's ability to understand, anticipate, and act on this data to drive customer value. But data is a very diverse thing. It's typically dispersed across many systems, and there's a lot of it. whether it's social data, crowdsourced data, data that your firm's collected, and a lot more. And with all of this data, there's a lot of noise. So as companies are trying to make plans to cut through this noise and gain insights so that they can use this to inform strategy as well as decisions, the output of this analysis, think of that as important data as well. This is something that provides a competitive advantage and, well, needs to be protected accordingly. So this input of what goes into that analysis is also important to control because it could include customer data, it could include personal information as well. So, and depending on where we store and process this data, we could run into various privacy laws and data protection requirements. So think of that as your in to these types of analytics, to the customer value discussion. And then next up, embrace digital innovation. This is a pretty broad one, yes. So for different companies, it's going to mean different things. For a retailer, this could mean harmonizing the different virtual as well as human, those in-store experiences for your customers. For others, it could mean experimenting with the Internet of Things or with mobile wallets for payments. But whatever the digital innovation that's brewing at your firm, see it as a good opportunity to embed security as well as data protection concerns and requirements into this discussion from the very beginning. Because more and more we're seeing this intersection between security as well as customer experience, where security actually becomes a part of an improved customer experience. And going along those lines is also about personalization these days. Customers, they expect to be treated as individuals in their moment of need. And there's this expectation for greater personalization, for customization, for engagement on the customer's terms. And to do this successfully, I think companies need to respect the privacy of people and understand their customers' preferences. So on the data protection side, we have to make sure that what was actually communicated to people in our privacy policy is actually enforceable and reflects how this data is really used. So those are just a few examples that could apply. You'll have to identify what the specific ones are in your organization. And when we do that, there's a couple of things to keep in mind that I'll go through in a moment here, but I believe we have another poll coming up.
We do indeed, Heidi. Thank you very much. So the last question we're going to put out to the audience today is around how structured is your internal project justification process? And I've been on both sides of this in terms of structured, somewhat structured, from as well as, hey, what's structure? We don't have that here. From my role in marketing, working with the sales teams, they've often come to me and say, hey, I'm working with a prospect here. They'd like a business case to help justify this business expense here, and even our end target will really not have a good idea as far as what they want. They'll just say, bring me something that justifies it, all the way to some we'll call them massive spreadsheets that I've worked with in the past and been on let's call it the creative end of the spreadsheet world, putting together these huge business justifications that 8 or 10 tabs worth of spreadsheets where you're putting your market analysis in there, your growth projections, your COGS, your manufacturing overhead. So there's a wide variety of what goes out there. So from our audience perspective, I'd love to see where you are from your personal experiences here. And my suspicion is some of these answers may come down to the size of your organization, may also come down to the markets you play into. If you're selling into a more controlled environment, a more regulated environment, it's more likely that some of these will be tightly structured. If you're a startup type organization that's really on your first few employees there, or you're selling into maybe in a B2B space where there's less structure, more around creativity, that third answer may be, hey, structure, what's that? I read about that somewhere, but that doesn't play here. So we'll see how where our audience comes across on these three categories today. Give people another minute or so to put their votes down here, and then again I'll take a quick read of those and then put it into Heidi to see what her comments are. So. Give people another few seconds here. So if you're debating where you want to vote, let's get the last votes in here, and I will give you a few seconds more. All right, we're going to close the poll down and see where we come in at. So, all right, somewhat structured. So really in the middle here. Although that low single digits there, 4% of the what structure is always interesting to see where your company is in terms of that growth scale, or is just a function of, hey, we're kind of a disjointed organization, but somehow things are still working here. The tightly structured, the challenge for those tightly structured is, how do you bring creativity into these project justification processes? Creativity and innovation in businesses is really something that everyone's always looking for, to try and find ways to find that new market, the new product, the new niche to go into. And sometimes when you're moving into a new business space, that these existing project justification processes may not apply. I mean, you look at some of the disruptive technologies in the past, and when you're trying to put a disruptive technology into your organization, oftentimes you need a disruptive project justification model, and that's where that creativity comes in. So with that, Heidi, I'm going to pass it back over to you, if you have any comments on where the audience lies, or if you have some more words of wisdom from your experiences and the breadth of customers you speak with out there.
All right. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I think you made some pretty good points earlier. For me, just looking at the results of this poll right now, I think it's reflective of what I see in the conversations that I have with my customers today too. For some, there's not much of a structure. They may be trying to build one, but it's also reflective of their own individual organization and how things typically get done. Generally, there is some kind of structure in place, but I think the key takeaway that I get from these conversations is that it's just really important to be flexible, because while we may have our own processes or just structured justification methods for making our business case, sometimes it doesn't quite align with the other cases that are being made in other parts of the business, and that can cause a bit of conflict as well, because there's only so much time that people have, as well as resources to dedicate to things. So being able to, I guess, help the company prioritize is not an easy thing to do. Okay. Good to see where folks are. Gonna go back to the slides here. And all right, so tying in the value of data protection to these various business imperatives that we have, a couple of tips to keep in mind when you do this. And we have to remember that, first of all, it's really all about the data. So follow that and start at this point. And with the data, we have to understand, well, what's the desired outcome of this particular business imperative, this project, this initiative, and what are some of the inputs that go into it? So what is this plan or approach that the company or that the business unit has to get to this outcome? And when we know that, we can start to identify and map out where some of these different security and privacy considerations can come in the process, as well as the data flow. And to do that, well, we can't do it alone either. We have to consider input from our peers within the business. And a couple of different ways to help get this conversation going with them is to just outright ask, what would help them be successful in what they're trying to accomplish. That may give you some ideas of how security or privacy concerns might start to create some barriers or issues. It could also give you a starting point to think about how better, or how more robust security and privacy practices could then start to create opportunities for the business here. And since we don't operate in vacuums, I thought I'd share budget-wise what we're seeing firms do today in terms of allocating their budgets. This is data from Forrester's most recent, the 2015 Global Security Survey. And the results here are the budget breakouts for North America and Europe for different categories of security spending. And these are breakouts that they'll definitely vary a bit depending on the individual firms, but at a high level and on average, this is what we're seeing today. And I have to say that over the years, this has become a lot more evenly distributed than we've seen in the past. It used to be very heavily weighted towards network security as well as data security, but now we have a lot more different categories that people are spreading out for. And looking at the year ahead and how this is changing, a little over a third of firms that we surveyed expected to increase their data security budget in 2016. Very few actually expect to decrease budget here, and for the most part, the majority are opting to keep their allocation the same. So consider this directional guidance. It's not a hard and fast rule by any means in terms of how you may want to allocate things. But no matter where your budget ends up and how much funding you're able to obtain, it's never really enough, is it? So we have to be smart about how we're prioritizing and thinking about our allocation of resources, in addition to taking additional steps to ensure that we don't lose our budget in the future. And so when we're doing this and thinking beyond building this business case, sharing a more comprehensive vision with the business, it's helpful to think about things and our efforts for data protection, not in terms of a one-time initiative or project, but rather in terms of maturity. Where are you today? And where do you need to be or want to be at a future state? And what are those gaps in between? What are those steps that you'll need to take to get to this next level of maturity? Build out this roadmap of what your program would look like and use that as a way of identifying where you are and the progress that you're making and what it would cost to get there and what you would need to get there as well. And then also tracking metrics, the relevant metrics over time to demonstrate where you are today and the progress that's being made, as well as its impact on the business. Going back to that initial example that we started with about exercising and staying healthy, metrics, they need to be holistic as well and not too narrow of a focus. Recognize that doing things like tracking your weight gain or loss or percentage of body fat, that alone isn't going to give you a full view of your overall health. And that's similar when it comes to data protection as well. So we have to think more holistically about the impact and the effects and what's also going in to contribute to these programs. And with that, this is my contact information if anyone has additional questions down the line or would like to reach out. So I'll turn it over to Bill now. Thank you all.
Thanks, Heidi. Appreciate the insights there. And just as a reminder, if people have any questions during the session, please feel free to use the questions tab. I'm going to go through a quick Digital Guardian overview here, and at the end of my section, we'll try to address as many questions as we can. Anything that we don't get to, we will follow up with you directly after the call. And as always, the slides will be provided to all participants of the call after the fact and available on our Bright Talk channel. So again, I'm going to do a quick about Digital Guardian, why Digital Guardian, and then we'll go on to the questions. So some background about us. We are a data protection leader. Millions of people rely on us to protect their sensitive data. Since 2003, this has been and continues to be our core mission. We're investing and expanding our offerings to make sure that we go beyond just data protection, but add in threat prevention and become a leader in the data protection space. Recent acquisitions such as Code Green, Savant Networks, Armor 5 have added to our portfolio of solutions that we can provide out to the market. In terms of where we operate, we are currently in 54 countries across the globe, and one of our largest customers out there has over 300,000 agents that they leverage on the Digital Guardian platform to protect their data and across a variety of use cases. We handle SMB, we handle Global 2000, Fortune 100, a broad cross-section of companies. And a couple of stats here, 7 of the top 10 patent holders in the world are currently Digital Guardian customers, and 5 of the top 10 auto companies are also Digital Guardian customers. So again, this speaks to the breadth of who we cover in terms of market share out there. We protect sensitive data across a broad range of industries there, whether it be energy, financial services, government, healthcare, technology, manufacturing. Our focus is on the data, and all these organizations have critical data that needs to be protected, and this is where Digital Guardian's core value is. So next, why use Digital Guardian? Here's just a quick overview of where Digital Guardian can deliver our enhanced data protection to your organization. I'm going to touch on a few of the key items in this here and talk about how we can link the business growth and security alignment like Heidi just discussed previously. So first, visibility. It's clearly very difficult to protect what you can't see. Here at Digital Guardian, we believe that this visibility is often the key first step to an effective data protection program. We can see data regardless of where it is created, lives, or is stored. With our content and context analysis, we can protect both structured and unstructured data. Understanding business processes and data flows can help find stakeholders when building allies needed to raise your business agenda within the organization. Next, data protection, and this is really what Digital Guardian's core was with the data loss prevention. Building on the visibility is the next step. The enforcement of policies that keep the data you are now more aware of protected. This is where Digital Guardian comes into play. Digital Guardian provides this protection regardless of where it lives. Keeping your critical data safe as you expand globally, for example, can drive increased revenue. Demonstrating business growth is a pillar in a business case and a key tenet of what Digital Guardian delivers. Next, system security. Breaches are nothing new, sadly, and data is really the target of most breaches there. With Digital Guardian Advanced Threat Protection, we link data sensitivity to the threats for the context needed to better defend your organization. Because we're data aware, we can see threats to your data in real time and act to stop them before they become a data breach. Because the data ultimately lives on a system somewhere, this too drives to the value in defending your organization from a threat and minimize the spread in a perimeterless environment that is so pervasive in today's environment. And finally, efficiency, and one thing here I think that links very closely with our discussion around driving the business model here is all the security in the world isn't going to help if you don't have the staff to manage and act upon the information you receive. Digital Guardian can address this with our managed security program as an option to complement our on-prem offering. With this, we host, manage, and run the entire operation and provide you with the insights to make better business and security decisions. Our on-prem solution delivers this data and system security proposition. Layering on our managed security offering further strengthens it. Shifting from a CapEx to an OpEx, or reducing the number of resources dedicated to your data protection because we own it, can both strengthen your business case. I just highlighted 4 of the key areas where we can help protect your organization and ultimately your data. In terms of how we can do it, Digital Guardian has we'll call it a flexible deployment model. We can be put out into organizations in any one of 3 different options here. There is your traditional enterprise software on-prem model where the software is licensed, installed in your organization. We go through that training process, and ultimately you as the customer own your program from end to end there. Clearly, as the vendor here, we provide support as needed, but you are the one who is owning this. The other end of the spectrum is this managed service program, the MSP model I mentioned here. Here you have a dedicated organization, Digital Guardian, that is running your program. We live, breathe, and eat this every day, and this is what our core competency is. We can offload your security program and have our team of experts watching your network, delivering back to you the security events to help drive better business decisions. And as a middle ground there for organizations who either A, aren't ready to shift one way or another fully, or B, perhaps because of some regulatory requirement, must have data remain on site, we have a hybrid model where we still help with the management, but the actual management console lives on your site there, and we access it through a secure link. Next, I just want to talk about a proof point from one of our customers, Jabil. They're a global manufacturer that touches a broad range of industries, everything from automotive to point-of-sale terminals to consumer electronics. Jabil deployed Digital Guardian to around 50,000 endpoints as a way to develop security as a competitive advantage in their arena. Ensuring their end customers' IP, such as technical details to manufacturers, stay safe allows Jabil to expand globally while staying secure. This quote here from Jabil helps demonstrate how they took a security solution and turned it into a business accelerator. This is from the CIO there, the CISO, excuse me. Digital Guardian gave us tremendous time to value and helped us change the conversation with business unit leaders. And I think, to me, that's a great comment there, that it's not just about being a security team, it's about talking to business unit leaders and having that CISO be a key decision or a key stakeholder in all organizational changes. So that wraps up my portion of the presentation. At this point, we do have a few questions from the audience that I'm going to read out here, and some of these are for you, Heidi, so I'm going to start with one of the questions here. It says, how would you guide business people to estimate their data value in terms of money? They regularly have not a clue of how to do this. Even worse, they might not be aware that their data has a monetary value.
Okay. Yes, I agree. A lot don't really have a clue for how to do this or where to begin. I've seen some companies have success with different approaches depending on the type of data that they're trying to value. So if it comes down to intellectual property, for example, sometimes that's a little bit easier because if we think about the data that may be behind development of a new product or a new service, for example, generally, if a business is investing in developing something new, there's a business case for it of how much they expect this new thing will bring in terms of revenue or benefit for the organization. So if that business case exists somewhere, there's typically a dollar amount, maybe an estimate that's included there, and you can use that as a proxy for valuing this data because if midway through the development process this data was stolen, that would certainly have an effect on the anticipated expected revenues from this new thing that's being developed. So I think pharma is a good example of this, but we've seen others in manufacturing who have tried to do this in this way as well. But then when we get to talking about things like customer data, consumer data, personal data, that gets a little more squishy. And sometimes, yes, you could talk about this in terms of the compliance perspective for value, so if it were to be exposed. But another way to do this is also question, if you did not have this data, what would that impact be? Another way to look at it could also be in terms of data quality. I've seen some companies have success getting through to the business in this way because data quality is something that they can latch onto a little bit easier at the beginning, understanding that if this type of data is of that quality, it doesn't produce or give them the kinds of returns or insights that they're hoping to get. And then using that as a way to then talk about data sensitivity as well to put a value on that. And I think anytime we try to value data in terms of money, we have to just accept that it's not an exact science. So at best, these are all estimates as well.
Thanks, Heidi. This is Bill. I just want to add a couple more comments from my side here. I think that's some great remarks there. The only thing I want to add is that, to me, when I look at estimating data value in terms of money, to me, when I look at data, it's generally designed to drive a decision, whether that be a product, a solution, sometimes driving where the business goes. And it isn't always, and that sometimes that data can say, no, we shouldn't do this, and it's a bad business decision. We learn data, and that's really how you can help monetize it, saying that we look at this, we have data here that is going to support a new business proposal, a new product launch, a new solutions launch. What is the market estimation of what that is? And that's part of what as a business leader, you need to understand is how you build those business cases and the models around, if we go into this market, what does that mean to the organization? And I touched on earlier in my presentation about that a big monster spreadsheet, and that's what I've used in some organizations in the past. It really is it's a glorified NPV model that looks to quantify all the different variables and inputs around a decision, and that's some of the data that you have there that is valuable in the organization, and that can be what helps drive towards the decision and helps create that monetization. That I have a product, I have data around a product that's going to enter this market, and I believe that market to be worth $15 million to the business. Is that a one-for-one like Heidi mentioned there? Not necessarily, but if we go into this market, we believe we can realize $15 million in incremental revenue or $50 million or whatever your hurdle is for a new venture. There's a kind of a proxy for what that data model is. So that's my 2 cents. And I'm going to pass it to Anne, who has the next question from the audience here.
Great, thank you both. So the next question is, who is really running point on data breaches these days, given the new visibility and regulatory requirements of financial services? Has it changed from IT to InfoSec to legal to business? And is this the most effective use given your view?
I think then I have to say it really depends within the companies that I've spoken to. I am seeing a bit of a move, more having legal come in to be that point person, but not necessarily legal counsel that's internal within the company, but external legal help. So the help of a privacy lawyer, for example, and this is the person who may be the point person for coordinating with the different response providers as well as the business. And in other cases, typically the more smaller organizations, have also seen some CEOs be that point person, spokesperson, the one doing the coordination, which I think is unusual, but an interesting change. I think what sets the successful companies apart with their breach response are the ones who really do this in a more coordinated way with a committee, really, that takes into account not just IT, not just security, but legal as well as other business stakeholders. So it could be PR, communications, everything from marketing to sales, really, just so that everyone knows their role, how they should be responding, what they can be doing and saying.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm going to add my little comment here as well, just to give my 2 cents. But when I look at who's running point, I almost break it up into 2 different ways. You have your internal response and your external response. And Heidi, you mentioned the CEO being part of it. In some cases, when there have been high-profile breaches, the public is looking to who is the figurehead within an organization who's taking responsibility. And oftentimes the CEO is coming out and saying, this is what happened, this is what we're doing about it. And because they're the leader, ultimately the buck stops with them. Once you get down to the internal side, it is the core team. I have a colleague of mine who is an organization that was in a high-profile breach a few years back. He was actually in a sales and business development role, and he was one of the key stakeholders on their breach response team. And the reason they called on him is because he'd been with the organization, he had a great deal of internal credibility and was able to pull together all the resources that Heidi mentioned there. You need to get sales, you need to get marketing, you need to get legal, you need to get IT, security, all these people together. And a lot of what makes a effective response is having a team that is running well. So that's where my take is on who's running this. So and I'm going to pass it back to Anne. I think we have time for one more question before the top of the hour here.
Okay, I'll add one more quick one in there, hopefully. Around 2015 budget breakout slide, how do you see the budget shifting?
Okay. So for this one, I think it's interesting. I mentioned earlier how in the past so much of it was weighted towards network as well as data security. And even though we hear and see firms trying to invest more within data security, I think we're seeing a couple of other shifts as well. So there's greater interest in things like managed services for example. I think just because of how, well, resources, skill shortage, and hiring challenges, I think, are leading more firms to go the services route. Other areas, well, I think we could argue that most investments that are made for data protection, for security, they're considered data security as well. And so it also depends on how people try to categorize these things here. So I'd point to services as an area that's growing. I think encryption is going to be one of those data security areas that we'll see a lot more activity in next year as well. And any kind of maybe privacy enhancing or policy enforcement types of solutions here.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Those are all the questions that we have time for today. Any remaining questions, we'll reach out to you via email to make sure that we get those answered. And to all of those who attended, you'll receive an email within 1 business day with the presentation and a link to the on-demand webinar and slides and any attachments. Thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar, and a special thank you to both Heidi and Bill. And this concludes our webinar for today. Have a great day.